never thought I'd live long enough to hear my own sons call me a burden. You raise boys to be men, you teach them how to split wood, how to respect the land, how to look a person in the eye when you speak. And then one day, those same boys whisper about what to do with you, like you're an old piece of furniture they're tired of tripping over. What they didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, is that I wasn't the one who needed to be taken care of. Not then. Not ever. And the old cabin they tried to sell out from under me, that was just one tree in a forest they couldn't even see. Before I take you into everything that happened, let me tell you this. If you've ever had someone you love decide you're disposable, stay right here. You and I are going to walk through this together, step by step, until the truth hits exactly where it needs to. And if these kinds of stories help you breathe a little easier, you're always welcome to stay for the next one. The cabin was never meant to be fancy. Hell, the first summer I built it, I slept on a foam mat and cooked beans on a fire pit made out of river stones. My wife, God rest her soul, used to joke that the place had more mosquitoes than floorboards. But it was ours. It was quiet. It was where life slowed down enough to hear your own thoughts again. After she passed, the cabin became the only place where the air didn't feel too thin. Some folks take off traveling, some jump straight back into work, some find a new hobby. Me? I went back to the mountain, put my hands on the old beams, listened to the wind like it was her voice telling me to keep going. My boys used to love that place. When they were little, they'd race each other from the truck to the porch, damn near tripping over their own feet just to be the first to grab a fishing rod. Back then, they looked at me like I was carved out of solid oak. But time changes people, and men who once begged for bedtime stories grow into men who think they're smarter than the hands that raised them. It started small. A comment here, a sigh there. Dad, it's dangerous for you to be up there alone. Dad, maybe it's time to think about assisted living. That one stung more than they knew. Not because they said it, but because they said it like I didn't have enough years behind me to recognize manipulation when I heard it. Then came the doctor's appointment. Nothing serious, just a checkup for a man in his late 60s who's chopped more wood than he's shaken hands. But my boys heard the word arthritis, and suddenly their eyes changed. Sympathy at first, then something colder. Calculation. We were halfway home when one of them muttered, soft but not soft enough, "We need to do something before this becomes a problem." I didn't say a word. Sometimes silence teaches more than a lecture ever could. A few days later, I woke up from a nap to hear voices on the porch. My son's voices. My son's talking to a realtor. My son's discussing the cabin. My son's planning to liquidate it. That was the word that made my heart go still. Liquidate. Like the cabin was a stock they could cash out. Like I was a number on a spreadsheet. The realtor asked, "Does your father know about this?" And my eldest, my firstborn, laughed. He won't even understand the paperwork. I didn't confront them right then. I closed my eyes and waited until the truck left. When they came inside, they acted like nothing happened. My youngest asked if I wanted soup. My eldest said we should talk soon. They were wearing the kind of smiles you use when you've already made decisions without the person who matters most. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with the old rocking chair, gently tapping the boards beneath me. The moonlight hit the ridge just right, and I remembered something my grandfather used to say. People forget who owns the mountain when they only see the cabin. And in that moment, I realized my boys had forgotten absolutely everything. That's when the old fire started warming up in my chest. Slow, steady, patient. The kind of fire that doesn't burn the forest, it reshapes it. And if you're still with me, well, then you already know this story isn't just about loss. It's about remembering who you are when the people closest to you forget. You stay close now, because the truth hasn't even started unfolding yet. I woke up the next morning feeling older than usual, but not weaker. There's a kind of tired that comes from age, and then there's the kind that comes from disappointment. One you can stretch out, the other settles in your bones. My boys came by late in the afternoon, wearing those matching polite faces they only put on when they want something. You'd think they practiced in the car ride over. My eldest sat across from me at the kitchen table and folded his hands like he was negotiating a business deal. My youngest hovered behind him, trying to look supportive but mostly looking guilty. "Dad," my eldest said, "we think it's time you let us help." "Help with what?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Your situation." I almost laughed. My situation. Not my health, not my needs, not my life. My situation. I told them I appreciated their concern, but I wasn't going anywhere. My youngest gave a sympathetic smile, the kind you give a toddler after they drop a toy. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. We know what's best for you." That's when I leaned back in my chair and asked them, plain as daylight, "Boys, is there something you're not saying?" They froze. People who are lying always do. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just exchanged a nervous glance that said more than words ever could. But they weren't ready to confess, and I wasn't ready to force it. Not yet. After they left, I sat there staring at the grain of the wooden table, the same table my wife and I sanded smooth together back when our hands were young and steady. She always said wood remembers how you treat it. I guess people do too. A few days passed quietly after that. Too quietly. I kept a sharp ear out, and sure enough, one evening a truck rolled up the mountain road again. It wasn't my boy's truck this time. It was the realtor's. And this time he'd brought a man in a clean jacket and dress shoes, the kind nobody wears to walk mountain soil unless they're planning to buy something. I stayed inside and listened through the window as the realtor pointed out the ridge, the slope, the creek. But he didn't mention the cabin. Instead, he said, "The Sons believe there's potential for development here." Potential. That was the word that told me this wasn't just about selling a cabin. They wanted the land, the whole strip around it, and they thought they could get it by pushing me out. The man in the jacket asked, "Are they the owners of record?" The realtor hesitated. "Not technically, but they are handling negotiations on behalf of their father." Handling negotiations. They made it sound like I'd hired them. The buyer frowned. "I'll need to see full ownership documentation, mineral rights, boundary maps, access agreements." Mineral rights. That's the moment I felt something deep inside me click into place. A memory, old and dusty as the papers that carried it. My grandfather's voice telling me, "This mountain ain't just dirt, boy. It's history. It's debt repaid. Don't let anyone take it from you." I stepped out onto the porch right then. The realtor's voice cracked when he saw me. The buyer tipped his head politely. My boys weren't there. Probably planned it that way. They didn't want me asking too many questions. The buyer said, "Sir, I hear there's interest in selling part of your land." "Is that so?" I asked. The realtor jumped in. "Your sons believe—" "My sons believe a lot of things," I said. "Doesn't make them true." The buyer gave a slow nod, the kind smart people give when they realize they're standing in the presence of the actual decision-maker. He asked if I'd be willing to discuss options. I told him I'd think about it, but that any conversation would need to go through me directly. Not my sons. The realtor's face went pale. After they drove off, I stood there on the porch letting the quiet settle. The mountains have a way of talking when you listen long enough, and that night I swear the wind carried a message my grandfather used to say, "Paper keeps the truth, people forget it." So the next morning, before the sun even crested over the tree line, I drove down to the county office. The same courthouse where my grandfather signed the papers almost a century ago. The same place my father added his name. The same place I locked away documents that no one alive even remembered existed. I walked up to the counter and asked for my old lockbox. The clerk dusted it off as she brought it out, like she was handing me a piece of buried treasure. In a way, she was. I opened it right there under the flickering ceiling light, and as soon as those old yellowed papers hit the air, I felt the ground shift, not beneath my feet, but beneath my son's futures. The cabin wasn't the prize, not even close. That was just the skin of the apple. The core was the mountain. And now, the boys were about to learn exactly who it belonged to. Stay with me. What comes next is where the real story begins. When I lifted those old documents out of the lockbox, the paper felt like it could crumble in my fingertips. But the weight of it, that was solid, real. The kind of weight only history can give. I spread the pages out on the courthouse table, and for a moment I just stared, letting the past settle into place. There were mineral rights dating back to 1924, elevation rights signed in 1946. access agreements stamped and sealed by 3 different surveyors across 2 different generations. And at the bottom of the stack, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe smoke, was the full land title, 6,400 acres, all of it, not leased, not borrowed, owned, free and clear, in my name. I thought about my sons then, about the way they spoke behind my back, the way they acted like the cabin was some burden they needed to manually offload. They had no idea they were standing on top of something bigger than their ambition could ever swallow. They saw a cabin. I saw a mountain that held every memory of my family's bloodline. I folded the papers back into the lockbox and asked the clerk if she could make certified copies. She blinked twice, like she didn't think anyone still walked around with documents older than her grandmother. Then she nodded, pulled on gloves, and got to work. That soft hum of the copy machine felt like a victory drum. As I waited, an older man in a dusty vest walked by and gave me a nod. "Haven't seen you down here in a long time, Harry," he said. It was Lester Ward, a retired ranger who used to hike the trails with my grandfather. "Still sitting on that mountain? Or have the boys talked you out of it yet?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Not a chance in hell." He laughed, clapped me on the back, and wandered off. But his question stuck with me, talked me out of it. That's what my sons thought they could do. Wear me down with guilt and paperwork until I gave up the one thing in this world that wasn't theirs to touch. When the clerk handed me the certified copies, she hesitated. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "you know land value's been climbing fast in that region. You sitting on something mighty valuable." I gave her a small smile. "Ma'am, I've known that for 60 years. She chuckled, not realizing I wasn't talking about money. On the drive back up the mountain, I kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the folder beside me. The road was bumpy, just like always. Roots pushing through the dirt, rocks shifting under the tires. It was a road only someone who loved it would tolerate. My boys never did. They used to complain every time we came up here, griping about the dust, the bumps, the climb. Back then, I thought they were just kids being kids. Now, I wasn't so sure. I pulled into the clearing and parked under the shade of the old spruce. The cabin sat quiet, smoke curling up from the chimney I'd repaired last winter. I walked inside, set the papers on the table, and took a long breath. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger burns fast. What I felt was something deeper, something that stays. I spent the afternoon organizing the documents, setting everything in order. I laid out the deed, the maps, the mineral records. I traced the boundary lines with my finger. I remembered my father doing the same, showing me how the ridge cut left like a crooked smile, how the creek marked the southern line, how the old fire road served as a natural border. Every inch of that mountain had a story, and I wasn't about to let greed erase any of it. Come sunset, I stepped onto the porch and watched the sky turn gold, then purple, then black. The stars came out slow and patient. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't grief or frustration. It was purpose. The next morning, I made a call I'd been thinking about for years, a call I'd always put off because the cabin felt like enough. But now the time had come. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. "Conservation Trust of the Valley," she said. "This is Margot." "Margot," I said, "this is Harry Whitaker. You spoke to me in '94 about a land acquisition." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice half shocked, half thrilled, she said, "Mr. Whitaker, we've been trying to reach you for decades. Are you finally considering it?" "I am." She inhaled sharply, the sound of someone trying not to scare off a miracle. "You still own the full acreage?" "Every inch." "Are you looking to sell all of it? Or a portion?" "All." Another silence, this one heavier. "Mr. Whitaker, do you understand what that means, what that's worth?" "I do." She cleared her throat. "Then I'd like to schedule a meeting immediately." We met at her office the following afternoon. The moment I walked in, she laid out maps and figures like a dealer laying cards on a table. She talked about wildlife restoration, watershed protection, fire breaks, trail easements. She talked about what the mountain could become if preserved permanently. I listened. Then I slid the deed across the desk. "I want it protected," I said. "Forever, And I want an ironclad clause that no family member can challenge the ownership, ever. Her eyebrows lifted. That's unusual. Not for families like mine, I said. She nodded slowly. We can do that. It'll make the contract long and airtight. Good. We negotiated numbers. I won't say them out loud because money doesn't impress me and bragging has never been my way. But I'll tell you this. It was enough that the trust's legal team asked me 3 times if I understood what I was signing. I understood perfectly. When the final papers were drafted, Margot slid them across the table. Mr. Whitaker, she said quietly, are you ready? I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake, not even once. As the ink dried on the last page, I felt the mountain settle its weight into a new future, a safe one, a protected one my sons would never be able to meddle with again. And as I walked out of that office into the afternoon sun, I thought to myself, when they find out, they're going to hear silence louder than any shout. If you've ever held a secret long enough for it to become your strength, stay with me. Because the moment my boys saw what they lost, well, that's when the story truly caught fire. The news didn't reach my boys right away. Big deals move slow on the surface, but underneath they travel like wildfire. Papers had been signed, early notices had been circulated to the county for filing, and survey teams were scheduled to start walking the land within the week. Meanwhile, my sons were still wandering around the edges of that cabin like foxes sniffing at a locked henhouse. 2 days after I signed the final agreement, I heard tires crunching up the gravel. Not 1 vehicle, 3. My boys stepped out of the first truck looking confident, like men who believed they had everything under control. Out of the second stepped that same buyer in the neat jacket, only this time he brought a surveyor carrying a rolled-up map tube and a laser rangefinder. The third truck held a young assistant who looked like he regretted taking this job before he even stepped onto the dirt. I stayed inside and watched through the window as my eldest pointed out imaginary property lines with the confidence of a man who'd never read a deed in his life. My youngest nodded along, echoing phrases clearly practiced the night before. The buyer listened, but his eyebrows kept slowly climbing toward his hairline. Finally, he held up a hand. Your father is the titled owner, correct? My eldest laughed, but it was a nervous one. Yeah, technically, but we handle all his decisions now. The buyer gave a tight, professional smile, the kind people use when they realize they might be dealing with fools. He gestured at the surveyor. Let's see the boundary maps. The surveyor unrolled a set of county maps across the hood of the truck. The buyer leaned over them, brow furrowing. These lines aren't matching what you're describing, he said. My eldest crossed his arms. The cabin and the land around it, he owns that. That's what we're selling. The surveyor shook his head. This parcel is only about 3 acres, and there's no separate record of ownership assigned to anyone except your father. My youngest tried to recover. 3 acres? Well, that's still. The surveyor pointed farther across the map. But this entire shaded region, roughly 6,000 acres, that's part of the original Whitaker title. My sons blinked. The buyer straightened. Your father owns all of this? They stared at the map, their mouths hanging slightly open like 2 boys trying to understand fire for the first time. And then something invisible cracked inside them. Their composure, their confidence, their plan. No, my eldest said quickly. That can't be right. Dad only has the cabin lot. The rest of this, no, that can't be right. The surveyor shrugged. County records say otherwise. I didn't step outside just yet. I watched as the truth tightened around them like a slow closing fist. The buyer rolled up the map. I won't move forward without direct authorization from the owner, your father. My eldest blurted, he doesn't understand the legal stuff. The buyer cut him off. He understood it well enough to own this entire mountain. Silence. Heavy, choking silence. The younger assistant spoke up softly, almost apologetically. Maybe we should just talk to him directly. My sons exchanged a look of pure panic, the look of men who realize they've built their entire scheme on sand. That's when I opened the cabin door. The screen creaked the way it always did, and everyone turned toward me. My boys stood frozen on the porch steps, pale as river stones. The buyer nodded respectfully. The surveyor gave me the same polite acknowledgement he might give a seasoned ranger. Mr. Whitaker, the buyer said, smoothing his jacket. I was told there was interest in selling this land. I stepped forward slowly, hands in my pockets. Interest, I said, is a funny word. Depends on who you ask. My sons practically jumped in front of him. Dad, just sign the papers, my eldest said. This is good money. It's time you let us handle things. My youngest added, we're trying to help you. You're making this hard. It took everything in me not to laugh. Boys, I said, what exactly do you think you're helping with? They launched into a rehearsed speech about safety, responsibilities, my age, the cost of maintaining land, the burden of outdoor living. They stacked excuses like firewood, hoping something would catch. But I noticed something. They never once mentioned me. Not my wants, my memories, my life. Just the land, just the deal, just the money. When they finally ran out of breath, I turned to the buyer. Sir, I said, I appreciate your interest, but I've already sold the mountain. The words dropped like an avalanche. My son spun toward me, eyes wide and frantic. What? My eldest snapped. You sold it? My youngest choked out. Without us? I nodded slowly. Without you. The buyer checked his watch. To whom? To the Conservation Trust. The surveyor let out a low whistle. The buyer exhaled, half impressed, half stunned. But my sons, they looked like the ground had just opened under their feet. You can't do that, my eldest shouted. You can't just... I can, I said, and I did. My youngest stepped forward, voice cracking. Dad, that land was supposed to come to us someday. Someday, I said, when you respected it, and me. But you tried to take something without even understanding what it was. They fell silent. The buyer and his team excused themselves and returned to their trucks, leaving my boys standing there like two men who'd lost a war they didn't know had started. When the engines faded down the road, the mountain settled into quiet again. My eldest ran a hand through his hair, pacing in a tight circle. My youngest stared at the dirt as if hoping some answer would sprout out of it. Why would you do this to us? My eldest whispered. To you? I said softly. Boys, I didn't do anything to you. I did something for myself. A long silence stretched between us, thicker than grief, colder than betrayal. They didn't argue after that. They just walked to their truck, climbed in, and drove away without another word. It was in that silence, deep and echoing across the ridge, that I finally understood how far a father's patience can stretch, and exactly when it needs to end. If you're still with me, stay close. Part of the story's still waiting uphill. After my boys drove away, the quiet settled hard. Not peaceful quiet. More like the silence after a storm, when the trees are still dripping and the air hasn't decided whether it's done raining. I sat on the porch and watched dusk pull its long shadows over the ridge, painting everything in that deep, familiar blue that only a mountain can carry. 2 days passed before I heard from them again. Not a call, not a visit. A text message, shared between the two of them, sent to my old flip phone. It just said, "We need to talk." Short message, heavy intention. They showed up the next morning, not charging in like before, but moving slowly, cautiously, as if the mountain itself had become something they didn't quite recognize. Maybe it had. My eldest stepped out first. His eyes were swollen, like he hadn't slept. The younger followed, shoulders dropped, carrying no argument, no charts, no paperwork. Just guilt. They approached the porch like two boys returning after breaking a window they thought I'd never notice. My eldest cleared his throat. "We didn't know about the trust deal until we called the county," he said. My youngest added, "We thought you were just living out here. We didn't realize you were still making decisions like that." I kept my voice even. Still making decisions about my own life? They flinched. Good. Not out of cruelty, out of understanding. My eldest sank onto the porch step, staring at the gravel. "We weren't trying to hurt you." "You were trying to decide for me," I said. "That's its own kind of hurt." Neither argued. For the first time in a long while, they didn't try to sell me a plan or present a solution. They just sat there, waiting for me to speak, the way they did when they were young and knew they'd gone too far. I leaned forward. "Boys, I don't expect you to understand what this land means to me, but I do expect you to treat me like a man whose mind is still his own." My youngest wiped at his face. "We thought we were helping." "You were helping yourselves," I said, not harsh, just truthful. "There's a difference." What happened next surprised me. My eldest nodded, slow, reluctant, but real. "You're right. Those two words coming from him carried more weight than any mountain. We talked for a long time, not about land, not about money, about us. I told them what the trust deal meant. The land would be protected forever, untouched by developers, unbroken by roads or mines. The mountain would stay exactly what it had always been, home. My eldest frowned. So, the cabin stays? It stays, I said, and you two can visit whenever you like, but it won't be sold, parceled, flipped, or carved. Not now, not after I'm gone. My youngest hesitated. We were planning our retirement around inheriting this. That's the problem, I said. You planned your own futures around something that wasn't yours yet, something you never asked me about. They both nodded slowly, absorbing it. Finally, my eldest spoke again, quiet this time. We're sorry, Dad. My youngest echoed him. We're really, truly sorry. Something loosened in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the start of it. Like the first crack of light before sunrise. I stood and gestured toward the trail that curved behind the cabin. Come on, there's something I want to show you. We walked about half a mile up a narrow path that wound past old pines and switchbacks. The morning fog was lifting off the valley, giving way to the sun in long golden shafts. When we reached the overlook, both of them stopped. The view stretched for miles, ridges rolling like waves frozen in time, valleys carved by centuries of rain, hawks gliding so high they looked like flecks of ink on the sky. It was the kind of quiet that humbles a man. This, I said, is why I kept it. Not for money, not for legacy. For this. My boys stood there, and for the first time since they were kids, I saw real wonder on their faces. The mountain didn't just reach them, it humbled them. After a long silence, my youngest spoke. We didn't see the value. You saw a price, I said gently. Not the value. My eldest looked out over the valley. We messed up. You did, I agreed. But you came back to talk. That counts. We stayed on that ridge until the sun climbed fully into the sky. No arguments, no tension. Just a quiet understanding slowly stitching itself back together. When we walked down, they gave me long, firm hugs. Those rare ones men give only when something in them has changed. They climbed into their truck, promising to visit more, promising to call before making assumptions, promising to see me as a father instead of an obstacle. Were they perfect men after that? No, nobody is. But something shifted. A softening, a respect, a recognition that I wasn't a burden. They had simply stopped looking at me clearly. As their truck rolled down the mountain road, dust trailing behind like fading memories, I stood on the porch and breathed in the morning air. Pine, earth, the faint sweetness of dew warming in sunlight. A smell I'd known longer than I'd known my own sons. A mountain doesn't need ownership to matter. But owning one had taught me something. Protecting what you love isn't selfish. It's necessary. And sometimes, the steepest climb isn't up the mountain, it's back into the hearts of the people who forgot how to see you. I stepped inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and watched the ridge glow brighter and brighter. The land was safe, my voice had been heard, and for the first time in a long time, the silence felt like peace. If this story reminded you that strength doesn't fade with age, you're welcome to stick around this old porch with me. I've got plenty more true tales about families who learned their lessons a little too late. And if you want to hear what happened to the neighbor who tried to steal water rights from the wrong grandfather, well, that one's coming next. You won't want to miss it.